Welcome back to the Educated Podcast, the show that unlocks the real stories and innovations behind the EdD experience. Each episode welcomes trailblazing educators, industry innovators, and visionary policy leaders who share how their doctorates transformed their lives and their careers. The goal here is simple: for you to laugh, to learn, to get inspired as guests reveal the diverse paths, pivots, and possibilities of the EdD journey. I'm your host, Dr. Minerva, and today, friends, we have someone truly exceptional joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Rishi Raj. Dr. Rishi Raj is a thoughtful scholar and a bridge builder between business and education. He is the Associate Director of the Arch 3 Center at Prairie View A&M University, a Provost Fellow for Excellence in Academic Affairs, an Adjunct Professor of Management at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, an editor and reviewer for several major academic journals. Dr. Raj's journey from growing up in India to becoming a leading voice in achievement and international education here in the US is full of lessons that will inspire anyone thinking about pursuing their EdD or finding meaning in their own academic path. Rishi, welcome to the Educated Podcast. It's a joy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's a joy. Okay, so let's dig right in. Many people hear EdD and think that it's only about K through 12 administration or curriculum development. But as your career shows, that's barely scratching the surface. When you think about your EdD, what does it really mean to you?
Yes, I've been on the receiving end of this EdD versus PhD and among all of the graduate degrees as well. Even when I started pursuing the degree, prior to that, I did my own research as well. What is the better fit for me? So I do not come traditionally from an education or even a social sciences background. I got my undergrad in accounting and then did my MBA, which was focused on economics. So for me, practical implementation, practice influenced theories that influence practice, those have always been the part of my instruction and learning and even professional life for that matter. So the EdD was a much more natural path for me because while the PhD is much more research intensive, looking at theoretical implications, the EdD still allows me to convert those scholarly literature that we learn about and contribute to, all of that into real life problems, into policy implementation, making changes that you can see through right in front of you. So that has been a really motivating factor for me. And time and again, it reaffirms my decision, feel good about picking the EdD to pursue. It's a terminal degree just like any other. But yeah, and this is not even in education. If you look at other disciplines, there's the MD in medical, there's the JD in law, all of these terminal degrees where you are contributing to the field. It's just a matter of whether you're contributing via research or via practice.
I love that. Yeah. And but the irony, though, for those who have gone through the journey of acquiring a JD, they're not called doctor.
Yeah.
You do the work, but you don't get the title. You get the courtroom, possibly.
Yes.
You basically summed that up beautifully, but I'm still curious. How do you explain its unique value specifically?
We all say, everybody's heard, change is a slow process. Any kind of change, to see it being implemented and see the results takes a lot of time, especially when we work in social sciences. You start thought process, which then becomes a policy implementation. And then you see the results. And a lot of times you probably don't even see the results of your impact, your legacy, right? Somebody else continues it. With the EDD, you're able to flip that script. If you just go over dissertations of EDD scholars, they're very practice focused. One of my colleagues, he was a principal. And like you said, K-12 is where we hear more of the title in. But I've had my fair share of colleagues and network where a whole bunch of EDDs are here in the higher ed space as well. But coming back to those dissertations, they were very much focused on I'm the principal of the school. This is an ongoing situation, and I'm going to use this dissertation to find a solution for it or analyze that problem further. So the fact that you're able to see that result in front of you, I think that is a game changer. We all, on some level, are motivated by what impact do we leave behind. Well, this one allows you to see the impact in front of you and not just leave it behind. So,
oh, wow. Yeah, that really resonated with me. That was so inspiring. So if no one else is inspired, you've done your job because it worked on me. That's so powerful. So the EDD becomes not just a degree, but a framework for applied leadership. I love that.
yeah.
All right, so let's move on to talk a little bit about you personally. So we heard about your EDD. You differentiated that for us, but you went from India to Texas. Could you explain what made you pursue your higher education in Texas?
Even today, and it has been for a while, the United States is the primary destination if you look at post-secondary education globally. Not everybody has the means to pursue that, and there's other sorts of obstacles, logistics, and things like that. So if somebody was to clear those obstacles, if you remove those barriers, then I don't think anybody in their right sense of mind would say no to the quality of education, the access to resources when it comes to conducting research, though, and platforms like conferences and associations and organizations. There was no doubt in that sense. What made it possible was I had family here in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That sparked the conversation. Instead of looking for why we should, we started talking about why we shouldn't. When you have a support structure that could facilitate at least the initial few years, so that made it very possible. When I graduated 12th grade, that's when I made the move. So all of my higher education degrees, all of those pursuits have been from the state of Texas.
About how old were you when you immigrated to the US?
This was 17, almost turning 18.
Ooh.
4 years.
Yeah. What was the adjustment period like for you as a male Indian international student?
It was fun. I think the culture shock aspect was not shocking. It was more in a fun, let's go with the flow kind of a vibe. So it worked out. And yes, of course, all of those intersectionalities that you just mentioned, India is still very much a male-dominated society. And then you add other layers like the caste system, socioeconomic status, those kind of elements. And then the bigger shock was when I came to Dallas, I enrolled in Texas Women's University. Right. So you spoke about the male aspect now, the ratio, and I'm sure it has changed now, but back in 2010, the ratio of women is to men was 91 or 93 is to 7, something like that. What made it even more, I choose to call it funny now, is throughout my K through 12 education was in an all-boys Catholic school in India. So you come out of an all-boys Catholic school from India and you're at a public university. And today, TWU is the largest university system primarily for women in the country. So there was a lot of learning opportunities then. It was, now I laugh about it, but as a male student, you couldn't really miss classes, skip classes, because it was very easily noticeable. There were instances where you try to do the gentlemanly thing and you hold the door for the ladies to walk in, and then you just keep on holding because the next 100 people to walk in were all women. It was a fun transition, and I think it also has its perks. When you're at a table, the emic and edic perspective, when you're the outsider, there's a certain value to your voices and to your perceptions. So that allowed me to build community. I pursued my degree in accounting, which TWU was, and I think still is one of the most affordable places of public education in Texas. So it was overall some of my most loving years.
And I'm glad that you mentioned Texas Women's University as well as the structures in India. So just to recap, you completed your undergraduate and master's degree from Texas Women's University. And as a male coming from a country where traditional gender roles, family structures, and social norms often prioritize men and create systemic disadvantages for women. In other words, patriarchal norms remain strongly embedded in Indian culture.
Yes.
How did you wrap your head around attending a college that has the word women's university in its name, where 91% of the student population is female?
I think in a lot of ways, and I realize it now, the identity formation that was taking place. As we talked about, so the socio-cultural values in India. So with the sudden flip, you go from being the majority into being the minoritized population. TW did that I love was provided that space, that accepting space, whether it was colleagues in the form of classmates or people that I worked with, my immediate supervisors, almost even till this date, other than one or two exceptions, I've always had female supervisors. That was from very early on. It was a very different kind of leadership that I was operated under. A lot more giving, a lot more nurturing. And I think that prompted career aspirations because I started with accounting. After that, I worked with Fidelity Investments, which is one of the biggest finance companies. Then I pursued my MBA and worked on a lot of consulting projects. But eventually, when it came time to pursue a doctoral degree, very early on, I wanted to get one, but I always wanted to get a PhD or a DBA in business administration because I wanted to teach. I think a lot of this shaped my decision. A lot of my time at TW as a student and as a student worker shaped that decision where I chose to instead do my doctoral degree in educational administration with the focus in higher ed, not on the K-12 side. And that circle is now complete because now I find myself back working in a higher ed setting as a professional. So I think a lot of it has to do with the community that I had at TW, the spaces that I was given, the opportunities that I was given, lots of conversations. At no point I ever felt that I'm the only male person in the class, and there was a lot of weightage to what I had to say. Now, if we talk from a critical perspective, how much weight, how much voice do you get in conversations, even when you're the minority, can also stem towards the fact that you're a male and you walk in with that expectation precedes you in that role, amongst others as well. But I think a lot of that nurturing that took place at TWU has resulted in my professional identity today and the way I work with my colleagues, with my students, with my peers as well.
Wow. That just felt so heartwarming to hear your reflexivity. And it sounds like navigating the environment taught you and having the supervisors that you had. And I'm so grateful that you had wonderful experiences that shaped you and your identity for you to be in the role and positions that you are as we speak. For your dissertation, you argue that educational leadership needs to consider the voices and perceptions of international students instead of solely relying on governmental guidelines in describing the student population. How did your own experience as an international student influence the lens of your dissertation research?
I think all of it dictated it, not just guided it, because when it came to picking a methodology, because I was very new to this kind of social science research, As accounting students, we never did a lot of research. We were more into case studies and capstone projects. So my doctoral program is when I was first introduced to a lot of elements of this kind of social science research. As I learned more, I realized that philosophically, I align with qualitative inquiry more than quantitative research. Quantitative research is amazing when you want to look at problem as black or white, but there's a lot of gray that exists as well. And my mind just naturally was attracted to the gray. So qualitative inquiry was really where it became a home for me. So when it came to picking a research genre within a methodology within qualitative research, I really got attracted to some of the non-traditional genres. I ended up choosing autoethnography. Ethnography, as we know, is the study of cultures. But there's, to some extent, and you could be the best scholar at ethnography, but to some extent, when you enter a culture or another subculture as an outsider, you might be collecting voices from, whether you're doing interviews, and you're collecting voices from participants that are natives to that culture. But in your recollection, in your data analysis, in your writing down of findings and making conclusions, there could be at least, even if it's a 0.001%, there is that chance of misinterpretation. Autoethnography became a space where if it's your voice, that is what the finding is. The researcher is the research. That was very empowering. Nobody gets to colonize your narrative. You get to tell it the way you have lived it. I picked up on that. I wanted to look at it. There's a lot of scholarly work on student identity development. But almost all of those theories were written down for a population. The focus of the population in focus was different than international students. I wanted to look at international student identity development process. Because this was autoethnography, it was extremely customized to who I was. So we added in male, we added in Indian on top of international to see how tailored it can be. I had spent over a decade in the US pursuing higher ed degrees in undergrad, master's, and doing a study abroad program, and now a doctoral program. So that's all of the options that you would have as a domestic student, as an American citizen as well. So I wanted to compare both of these positionalities. When you have the same opportunities, same platforms, but two different categories that define you. As an international student, not a politically defined word, but it has an official definition. The government decides who is an international student. There's a particular visa that defines what an international student can do, what can you study, what can you work, how much can you work. There's an expiration date to all of these pursuits. So that guides, so your decision making is not very free-willed. You're still behaving within a prescribed box. I wanted to focus on that aspect of identity formation, the decisions that I'm making, or any international student for that matter. How many of those decisions are your own versus how many of those are enforced on you systematically? So that's why when you say how much of this guides your dissertation, I would say it dictates every aspect of it. Because I love that you used the word reflexivity, because autoethnography is all about that, right? So my dissertation allowed me to sit down and look at the last 10, 12 years, which when you're living those years, you're too busy. But when you sit down and look back, then you build a lot of perspective. So that's what gave birth to my autoethnographical account.
Wow. You talk about autoethnography, which is a qualitative research approach. And I believe you use the International Student Identity Model as your theoretical framework to explore your academic journey as an international student. As a result, you came up with 4 themes for your dissertation research. And the 4 themes were policy is all powerful, presence of support structures, clearing the path of immigration, and fourthly, resiliency. So beginning with policy is all powerful, what might universities do differently with that insight?
And universities can take a lot from this. When I finished up my dissertation, along with one of my committee members, who's a senior leader in higher education, we wrote some peer-reviewed articles in platforms that were read by deans and provosts. That was the audience with them. Policy implementation specifically, 5 strategies that you can implement. So when we talk about recruitment, student recruitment, particularly international student recruitment, what those students are going to be studying has a lot to, or if not a lot, does have another variable in that equation, which is how would this path of immigration look like? Students that are pursuing degrees often want to convert that into a career. Now, there's a different kind of visa status for when you're a student, and there's a different kind of visa status when you're an employee. So that transition, not all degrees and not all majors guarantee or even facilitate that transition, which is why you're going to see that when we talk about international student enrollment in the US, you're going to see a lot of weight on the STEM side of things, engineering and math. And then after which you're going to see some in business, mostly in the accounting side. But you're not going to see a lot of weight on the social sciences side. So it's not that international students don't want to pursue all of these wide array of studies that we have, but they are limited to those choices because of how it's going to affect their immigration path after graduation. That's one area because selecting your major is a big part of recruitment of students. Then there's also support services. International students, for example, are not allowed to work off campus. So that eliminates the entire concept of having internship courses, for example. Even if your degree plan allows for it, electives, you will not be able to pursue those internships. And I'm not generalizing because there may be cases, I'm not aware of all policy regulations. But as a general note, students are not allowed to work campus. So any internships that would take them outside of that academic hat and put more of a professional hat on them, they're not allowed to do that. They would risk losing their visa status if they choose to do that. So if you're talking about holistic academic development, it also includes professional development of students, getting them prepared for what's to come. So that's a significant part that international students cannot indulge in. So, and there's a couple more things like that, which are more policy driven, what you can and cannot do. But that's why these conversations come out of this dissertation. What can higher ed do? What can governing agencies do? Because it's all tied in.
Totally. Policy is absolutely powerful
One
in
of
so
my
many
favorite
domains.
mentors in the world, she said that policy is a way to govern human behavior. And I see it every day.
Rightfully so. Thank you for explaining how the theme policy came up in your dissertation. Let's look at the second theme, the presence of support structures. You just mentioned your mentor, who seems like a sage. So, with regards to minority mentorship, what story or experience can you share that revealed just how transformative mentorship can be?
All powerful. I think it makes all the difference in those moments when that's the only thing that you have as a network, as a support structure, because it can take shapes on the formal side and it can also be very informal. Coaching you through cultural mentorship, what I have seen on the receiving side and now on the giving side, I've seen that the coaching where you help upskill somebody. If you're going to be a qualitative researcher, your coach can work on you, make you a better qualitative researcher. But then that coaching also overlaps with mentoring, where you are not just invested in me as one of the roles that I'm playing as a researcher or a practitioner, but you're invested in me as the human that I am. So then it's a long-term investment. And I think why I especially focused on the cross-cultural mentoring aspect of it is when we look at institutions that are PWIs or institutions that are catering to a specific demographic or a specific agenda. There's R1 institutions which are focused on producing research, then there's comprehensive schools, there's liberal arts schools. So I think when you are the other, right, when you're not part of the same goes back to me being the other at TWU. So, and there's been a lot of stages where I've been the other. And at this point, I'm very comfortable with that as well. So anytime my paths cross with somebody else who's also the other and who has been the other in the system, then I think there's a natural element to that connection, which cannot be created, which cannot be formulated. It just happens. It exists on its own. So I think that was the strongest thread that ties all of this together.
Very powerful. And I'm glad you elaborated on minority mentorship, as that was totally a sub theme to your presence of support structures finding. Let's look at the third finding of your dissertation, which is clearing the path of immigration. How did you balance those two words, the system and the person, while writing about immigration and identity?
Because immigration is one of the guiding lights, you just follow that. That's what dictates your path. And in the last almost 2 decades, I've seen so many flips with immigration. Immigration has always been a topic whenever we're talking about government or administrative changes and just the entire topic of migration as well. So a lot of policy changes in that aspect, and your approach then becomes that of a reactionary, a responsive, or adaptive approach. So because that guides a lot of what you are doing, what you're not doing, just to give you an example, at 3 different times during my undergrad program, I filled out a change of major form because I did not have the personality of sitting behind a desk and crunching numbers and becoming an accountant. I did not. And kudos to those who do because they're doing amazing work. One of the best classes that I had on my BBA program were the marketing ones, where you get creative. You're talking about advertisements and commercials, reading demographics, trying to understand trends and decoding consumerism preferences and trends and those kind of things. It was really fun. There was a natural liking to that. I still remember I was enrolled in one of the marketing classes during Super Bowl. And for 3 or 4 classes, all we did was decoded and analyzed the Super Bowl commercials. I wanted to pursue marketing a lot of times, but at all 3 of those junctures where I filled out that change of major form, there was somebody who prohibited processing that form. And all of these, I would say, mentors, the tough love mentors. And there's always people who will give you that tough love. And along the lines of pursuing a career once you graduate and translating that student visa into an employment visa is going to be much more tougher, if even possible, with a career in marketing than in accounting. And I absolutely have no regrets. I'm not even going to use the word regrets because accounting was wonderful. And even today, the positions that I work in, research grant administration, there's a lot of skills that I use from accounting. Higher ed administration does not naturally come with a fiscal background discipline. So I was able to find my niche that way. But had immigration not been a conversation piece in this equation, I probably would have tried marketing, gone for something like that, something that allows me to interact more with people one-on-one. So I'm just sharing this to show you how a lot of the choices that you make are guided by what the end goal is.
Yeah, I especially appreciate that nothing has gone wasted
Yeah.
in your academic journey. And hearing you speak reminds me of the social marketing classes that I took as well. And marketing is so fun, especially if you are interested in demographics and priority populations. While we're still speaking about immigration, so what, if anything, about your perspective or findings on immigration has changed since you wrote your dissertation?
My scholarly work on immigration has always mostly been limited to international students in a higher ed environment. So it's a much bigger field than that when we're talking about immigration. So what I have noticed and the changes that I have in me at this point is now I have a much better realization of how much power each stakeholder holds. There are students coming in from all parts of the world, and not just into the US, to a lot of other countries, right? Canada, the UK, Australia. These are all some of the top destinations for international education. So there are students going into all of these countries to pursue education. And they bring in their aspirations. So that's one level of power, or one piece of the power, because those aspirations are powerful. They guide what our future generations, how they'll run the world. Then the other element of power is the servingness that higher education institutions have. They are, when international students call these universities their home away from home, they truly mean that. And the International Services Department, no matter how small, because we usually see that on the student life side, student affairs side, international services get a really tiny part of the overall budget because they're serving a much smaller population. But they really do their best to make those students feel at home when they call this their home. So that's also powerful. And then there are people in positions of power, agencies that dictate and guide immigration guidelines and policies that affect what these schools can do and what incoming students can do, and what they cannot do also. A lot of immigration policy is dictated by what a particular country needs at a given time. Changing workforce demands will increase a nation's perception on immigration. Right? Changing demographics does that too. All of these elements hold a different amount of power. And what you can do, what a student, at least from that perspective, because my dissertation was always from that perspective, what powerful a student's pursuits and aspirations are sometimes might clash with the university's ability to serve them and the government's ability of how they see their nation's immigration system. What makes it complex for policymakers is that this is all dynamic, which means it's always changing. It's never an absolute point. And that is reflected in changing international education markets as well. We've seen a rise in a lot of other nations when it comes to pursuing international education and attracting international students from globally. We're seeing a new trend now where, because even if there's no systemic barriers, logistics itself make it almost impossible for everybody or most students to pursue international education from foreign countries. Cost is a big part of that obstacle, right? How do you finance that? If you're looking at, you're very well aware of the cost part of higher education degrees, even for domestic students, right? We can all look at numbers at student debt, student loans, financial aid, and those kind of things. So that paints you one picture. But then when we are talking about international students are always considered out of state. You cannot work outside, so you cannot financially sustain yourself. You're coming into a country with zero credit history, so you cannot take out loans. A lot of international students, for the most part, are depending on family and personal financial support. Now factor in the whole concept of currency exchange rates. There's a lot of countries with the different exchange rates to the US. I can speak for India, which currently is $1 is equal to 90 or 91 Indian rupee. When I came over here, it was 56 rupees, something like that. And that has grown up to the early 90s today, or late 80s. So that's a big difference maker in which students can pursue international educations and who cannot. So all of this to say is that the market has changed as well, has responded to these obstacles. One of the newest features of this changing market is that we're seeing when students cannot get to these campuses across the world, the campuses are going to them. In the last 2 years, there have been, because India is the most populous country in the world, and which has a high literacy rate and an appetite for education. A lot of universities from the US, from Australia, from the UK are now setting up regional campuses in India. So you're bringing in the branding to them, you're bringing in the education as a product to them. And also there's ways where they're figuring out how to do capacity building using native faculty and conducting research, collaborations, those kind of things. So these obstacles have existed, but they're also now reshaping the whole pursuit of education.
Capacity building is so integral. With regards to your fourth finding, resiliency, when you look back now, how has your own resiliency evolved since you finished your dissertation research?
Resiliency has, for the most part, always been one of the easiest things for me. I have never contextualized, when you're in a system that was never created for you, your desires and your wants will not be on page one of the menu. That's not what's being offered because the system was never built for you. If we're looking at higher education as a whole system, we're still working on the frameworks that were created in the 1800s from Europe, the Yales, the Harvards, and the William and Mary. And that it was a different kind of demographic, it was a different kind of goals. Institutions were producing ministers. That's not where we're living today. But there have been a lot of changes. Industrial revolution, both of the world wars changed demographic needs, workforce demands, and what colleges were teaching that changed. But at no point in all of these changes have international students been the population in focus. There's, I think, if I'm correct, there's over 1 million international students in the US right now, 1.3, 1.5, something like that. But percentage-wise, that's still a very small percentage. So when and this is just me speaking this is how it's worked for me. When I know that I'm in a place that was not built for me, that is not meant for me, then a lot of it is upon me to navigate instead of hoping for the system to provide for me. So when you have that clarity, I think resiliency then becomes kind of easy, relatively easy, because you set your expectations accordingly. It sharpens your navigation skills. But I think that has what allowed me to do this for the last almost 2 decades now. And I hear a lot of different narratives, some opposing to what I'm saying. And the best part is that everybody has to figure out what works for them individually. What worked for me, somebody else might not define resiliency the way I do. I recently worked with scholars who work on sense of belonging. I have recently started looking into unbelonging as an asset. My gender, my color, my last name, socioeconomic status, a lot of these things that are assigned to us. We're born into it. And then if I was to carry all of these flags with me in all of the rooms that I entered, it might take a lot of energy out of me, right? So I place more value on what I create myself instead of what was assigned onto me. And that positionality has allowed me to help navigate things quicker and faster and build, whether it's intellectual capital or social capital. So that's how I have defined resiliency.
It sounds like you're very clear about who you are. Clarity is the ultimate goal for many people. You have definitely worn many hats: business, management, higher education, editorial leadership. I'm curious, what have you learned about how scholarship and stories of achievement get shared and amplified? You mentioned unbelonging, which sounds so innovative. Can you speak a little bit about that?
In no ways have I even attempted to look at unbelonging from a scholarly angle. Eventually, I would. I have had a myriad of roles, and I think it comes because I have combined a lot of disciplines together and some intentional decision making as well. Picking an EdD was one of those because I realized that this way I can still keep alive that part of me, which was doing accounting, which was working at a finance company, which was teaching economics. What I realized that at the end of the day, higher education, there's a lack of professionals that indulge in these disciplines because the people who are working, who are seasoned professionals in education, all of their degrees come from that branch of social science, from education. The COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted a lack of fiscal management knowledge among higher education administrators and leadership. We saw a lot of universities shut down. So I was able to reposition what skills I had, the professional backgrounds that I've had, and still make that fit into what I do in academia in terms of serving our students, because that is still the guiding light for all of this. What has also made it slightly easier for me at this point currently is that I manage a research center with independent autonomy, which is an independent body, even though it's tied to College of Education at Prairie View. But I'm not tied with any particular academic program. I do teach at UT Rio Grande Valley, but I teach as an adjunct, so I'm not on a tenure track. So a different kind of expectations for me. So running a research center in a lot of ways, and I'm going to keep aside the scholarly pursuits for a while, but running a research center in a lot of ways is like running a business. You have to secure your own funding. You have to build a lot of relationships. We have an advisory board that is filled with people from the corporate and industry side of things, oil and gas companies, right? We're situated in Houston, and that's a privilege we have. Then there's a faculty affiliate wing that we started recently, and that has given us access to top scholars in the nation and across the world as well, who bring in their expertise and allow us use our platform to build it. We have given birth to completely new wings of a research center that you wouldn't hear of in many places, like an artist affiliate wing and an athletic affiliate wing. This allows us to make our center breeding ground for innovation, for multidisciplinary work, and the impact is felt accordingly. I still feel that in a lot of ways, I'm still using my MBA courses on managerial decision making, how to use data to guide your decisions. So those kind of elements. I do like earlier on you said that you didn't miss out on any of the other skills that you pursued in accounting. So I truly did not. For a while, I thought that was gone, but I see it every single day that it's still very much here. I always say the mind is business administration and the heart is academia.
That's so fascinating. Using corporate systems to enhance academic creativity, you're breaking the mold of heuristics. You're essentially merging the efficiency of business with the empathy of education.
I think there's really no other way, because every time higher ed goes through a phase where it has to adapt and reshape itself, eventually the progress and performance is judged by numbers that it's producing. How are your degrees affecting workforce development? That judging criteria is very corporate at the end of the day. That is what allows me to do what I do.
Excellent. And that's the kind of story that shows the applied heart of the EDD. Turning research into real world transformation.
Absolutely.
So let's just pivot to lessons learned and some words of encouragement. As you look across your journey from earning your EDD in 2021 to your many leadership roles today, if you could give one message to someone about what an EDD can unlock, what would that be?
I think it can unlock anything you want to unlock. We talked about how a PhD is more research-oriented and an EDD is more practice-focused. But if you choose to conduct research and define a career which is focused on research, and that inspiring your academic roles and your service roles, you can still do that with an EDD. I pursued an EDD program, and took 5 or 6 research courses, and all of my faculty in my research courses were from R1, one of the biggest Texas A&M university. The system is one of the biggest one, if not the biggest system in the country. So all of my professors are coming in from these R1 research intensive schools who have been trained accordingly. At the end of the day, I walked out with my EDD degree, but that does not limit my research capabilities, right? In fact, I chose to go the non-traditional route and pick up autoethnography, something that you rarely see in dissertations for doctoral students, particularly those who are just entering social sciences. I'm just using this as an example that the EDD opens up more doors than you think, but it still doesn't close the door on what a PhD would or could. You still have that option. Ideally, if you see yourself as a decision maker, as a policy implementer, as leadership, whether on the K-12 or on higher ed side, the EdD makes it a little bit easier because the coursework is designed in a way where the implementation part of you is going to be put under test more than the inquirer in you who's problematizing issues in society and finding solutions for that. But it's a gumbo, there's no wrong recipe. So you cook it the way you want, and you can do your research and use your EdD to affect changes around you.
I'm glad you mentioned the implementation component, right? Because implementation science is a whole nother field. You can have a great intervention, but if the implementation of that intervention is not applied adequately, then it's going to be failed.
And that's the whole purpose of research, is to bring change in society. I'm part of the CPED network, which is the Carnegie Project on Education Doctorate, which guides a lot of ways that EdD programs across the country are run. And they're redefining the whole idea of what a dissertation should be. A dissertation in practice is what they're calling it. And we're seeing some amazing products. A couple of years ago, I came across a dissertation from Clemson University, which was a rap album.
Oh.
So talk about creativity and bringing the you in your dissertation. So it's endless. I think if there's a research genre that does not exist, as long as you're working with a nice committee, you can make one. The EdD, all the doors are open, like I'm saying.
Dr. Rishi Raj, thank you for joining us on the Educated Podcast. If I was hungry, I am not hungry anymore. I am so full and complete. Your story reminds us that the EdD isn't just about earning a title. It's about reimagining what's possible when knowledge meets purpose. You've officially become advised. If this conversation today made you think, made you laugh, made you dream bigger, hit subscribe, leave a comment or a review, and share this episode with another current or aspiring EdD. Your support helps these stories reach more people who are interested and ready to take the leap on their leadership journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, keep finding new ways to innovate, and become ed-dicted.